My name is Janelle Anderson, and I will be talking about exclusionary policies and practices in Chinese minority education, the case of Tibetan education. The article is written by Bonnie Johnson and Nalani Chetri. First, I will talk about why education systems exist. Educational systems are in place to reproduce the dominant society in which they are an integral part or to impose a new social order. Another goal is to promote national unity and economic development. The development of mass education in multicultural societies has often been at the expense of minority culture and ethnic identity. Schools are often the medium through which the state establishes the culture of the dominant language, while at the same time depriving linguistic minority children of their right to use their mother tongues. Minority education policy is fraught with political, educational, economic, and social complexities. The author's purpose for writing this article is to talk about examining the government of the People's Republic of China and how it modifies its educational policies to achieve separate and distinct regional objectives, which are linked to regional and ethnic differences. These policies often result in exclusionary practices. The Chinese region of Tibet illustrates the dichotomy of Chinese educational policy, how to achieve universal education for all students and at the same time contain regional ethnic resistance against the communist government and maintain national unity. Researchers Johnson and Chetri tell us China has over 56 official nationalities. Their population of over 1.2 billion people has over 70 million of them that are non-Han Chinese. Many of the minorities in China have been punished by policies that exclude them from fully participating in and gaining benefits from the Chinese educational system. The Chinese education system. Universal primary education has been an important goal of the Chinese government and is viewed as a means to improve the economy, the standard of living of its citizens, and as a way to ensure the continued existence of the communist state. To achieve these goals, Chinese educational policies intentionally and inadvertently exclude certain groups from full participation in the educational system. There are 5 characterizations of Chinese education: attempts to universalize elementary education, achievement measured by examination, a uniform curriculum laden with a nationalist message, teaching styles that emphasize the authority of the teacher, demands for great amounts of memorization and recitation. Only certain children will be allowed to go to middle and high school. Minority children are usually not able to advance past elementary school. Chinese law guarantees every child 9 years of schooling. The government's ability to provide mass education is limited by both economic and societal influences. Economically, the task of building over 1 million schools, the number required to implement this objective, is a strain on the limited resources of the government. Even so, approximately 80 to 90% of children begin elementary school in China. After the completion of elementary school, students are required to pass an examination to advance to junior high or middle school. A portion of the examination tests students' knowledge in Chinese or Mandarin because secondary education is taught in this language. This creates a barrier for linguistic minority students who are not known to speak this language. Tibetan children who enroll in elementary school are less than 10% likely to go to junior high school or middle school. There is a secondary examination after junior high school to advance to high school, which is even more competitive than the first. Likewise, a third and final examination, called the national examination, is required to gain admission to university. Researchers have found that minorities are being excluded because the Chinese feel they will bring down their education levels. The Han people feel they are superior and therefore want the education to be focused mostly on them and their culture. China is a unified, glorious country with a great past, an uncertain but improving present, and a bright future. The minority nationality children become very self-abased when they find no reference to their culture or history in school materials. When they find there is no content which they can make them feel proud of being a person of their own nationality, they lose self-esteem and interest in schooling. This is reflected in the high dropout rates of minority children. Prior to 1951, Tibet had its own traditional form of education, monastic education. Tibetan tradition required that all families with more than 2 sons send one of them to a monastery to become a monk. The schools taught basic literacy in Tibetan and the values and teachings of the religion. With the advent of communism in Tibet from the 1950s onward, the Chinese opened schools to spread the communist ideology and power base. The goal of the communist government was to assimilate the Tibetans into the Han Chinese culture. Chinese became the official language in all schools, and as a result, Tibetans grew illiterate in both Chinese and Tibetan. Tibet remains one of the least literate regions in China. Literacy rates are anywhere from 44% all the way to 74%. Another major problem for Tibetan education is the lack of qualified teachers. 70% of teachers have no more than a high or middle school education. In rural areas, some teachers cannot teach above grade 3 because they have no knowledge of standards for more than a 5th grade school student. The Chinese government has created incentives for Chinese teachers to relocate and teach in Tibet. However, because of the generally held belief in China that living at high altitudes does damage to one's health, it is usually only those who cannot find jobs in their home province who move to Tibet. A final limitation to Tibetan higher education is the lack of universities in the region. The small number of Tibetans who do get a higher education usually attend teacher colleges. Researchers' conclusions. China's educational success in Tibet and other minority regions will depend on their ability to engage ethnic students in the universal primary school system. For universal education to be embraced, it must be seen as a way to improve one's situation in life. If public education does little more than assimilate the Tibetan students into Han culture, minority students will continue to drop out of school and consequently be excluded from enjoying privileges of education. How does this relate to the course? Education in China shows how important it is to give students a proper education, even if that means using their native language. Schools are focused on educating children in the language of the country they are in, but it ends up hurting them in the end. For example, students in America are not always given the education in the language that they speak, so in turn, their education in America is not always worth it. My overall impression. I found this article to be very interesting. There's not a lot that is talked about when it comes to education outside of the United States. I like to see how education in other countries is similar and different than ours. And in Tibet, the case of Tibet, it is very different from education in America.